All right, today we're going to talk about the first Spaniards to see Texas, and we're going to talk about the reason why the Spanish go to Texas and why, consequently, they're going to soon thereafter leave Texas. In order to do that, we need to talk further about the Spanish in the Caribbean. So, as we mentioned last time, the Spanish arrived in the Caribbean initially under Christopher Columbus, believing that they were right off the coast of India, near China, perhaps near Japan. Hence the reason they called the people of the New World Indians. Well, after a while, they eventually realized this is not, in fact, just off the coast of India, but in fact a new world. And what the Spanish do at that point is they do continue this mistreatment of the New World people that had begun under Columbus, and the Spanish eventually take over these islands in the Caribbean from the Taínos. Initially, they're using this encomienda system taken from the Moors to essentially enslave the Taínos and force them to extract all the gold they can from these various Caribbean islands. Once the Taínos start dying out, again, the Spanish start to import African slaves. And one of the things they're going to put these African slaves to work on is sugar. So the Spanish start importing, and this is part of this Columbian exchange, start importing items that they had brought from Europe, such as sugar, such as fruits, olives, wheat, things like that, livestock. And they would use the remaining Taínos. Again, the Taínos start dying out due to European diseases and African slaves to harvest these crops. By 1510, essentially the Spanish had taken over the major islands in the Caribbean. Well, it's at this point the Spanish are going to start exploring more to what we today know to be the mainland of the Americas. But back then, the Spanish didn't know that. Now, they knew they were in a new location that wasn't Asia, but they weren't sure how far away they were from Asia. And as a matter of fact, a lot of Spaniards continued to think that you just move a little bit west and we're going to show up right at Japan, China, and India. So what the Spanish start doing in the 15 teens is they start sending these various expeditions out to map the West, again, hoping to find India, China, or Japan. One of these expeditions is going to be under this guy. The guy's name is Alonzo Alvarez de Pineda. Pineda is going to set out in 1519 with 4 ships. He leaves from Jamaica, what's today Jamaica, and he and these 4 ships will take off, and they're going to set sail around what we today know as Florida, start sailing around the Gulf Coast, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and they're going to start setting off across what we today know as the coast of Texas. Now, Pineda and his crew, they're not going to step foot off of their ships during this journey. So they're going to describe what they see inland. They describe seeing Texas. They say they see this beautiful land. They say it's full of bays and rivers, and they say it looks incredibly fertile. But they don't step off their ship until possibly they get to this area that's today we call the Rio Grande River, the end of the Rio Grande River. So according to some people, Pineda, as we'll talk about in just a second, his journals are very vague, and again, this is the first time Europeans are seeing this area, but he says that he and his men disembarked briefly to investigate one of these bays. Some people contend this is the Rio Grande, making Pineda and his crew the first people outside of American Indians to set foot in Texas. Now, seeming to confirm this, okay, so this is Pineda's map, and if you look here, there is writing. This is what some people think describing the Rio Grande. And seeming to confirm this is a stone that was found in 1974 that some people refer to as the Pineda Stone. So a farmer down in the Rio Grande Valley was near the bay of the Rio Grande River, and he finds a stone that says Alvarez de Pineda, 1519, and it seems to give confirmation that, hey, the Pineda did in fact stop in Texas. This is the bay he was referring to. Unfortunately, we think this is a fake. As a matter of fact, Pineda Stone is spelled wrong. I believe the misinterpretation is the tilde over the end. We don't think he actually used that in his name. So probably was a forgery. People make stuff up, want to come up with these historical objects. So this isn't proof that Pineda was the first European to set foot in Texas. And as a matter of fact, we think that the place that he set foot in was down here, was actually this Rio Panuco, just a little bit south of what is today Texas. So right here in northern Mexico, that's where we believed he set foot in. And his description kind of matches the Indians of this area more than it does the Indians of this area here. So Pineda and his crew were the first to see Texas, but they probably were not the first to step foot in Texas. Now, there is a possibility, and this is probably more than we need to discuss here, but some of his crew members, when they did step foot here, some got separated from the crew, and it's possible that some of them made their way up into Texas. But if that's the case, we have no written evidence that that's the case. So Pineda, first to map Texas, first to see Texas, but probably not the first to step foot in Texas. So this is our first written depiction of Texas, or written map of Texas, but probably not the first to step foot in it. All right, so Pineda, when he returns 1519, he's going to bring information back to the Spanish, who have now started filling up these islands here in the Caribbean, about what they saw on the coast. They're going to say, hey, it's an entirely new area. This isn't India. This isn't near Japan. And it's not just Pineda. Some other expeditions had started to go around what's today the Yucatan Peninsula, sort of the coast of mainland Mexico. And some of these expeditions started coming back with information that, hey, you know, we're not near Japan, India, Japan, China, anything like that. But when we're over here, we're seeing, as we're viewing from our ships, these large cities. Now, what they're seeing is these large civilizations of Mesoamerica. As we talked about before, agriculture began in Mesoamerica. And because agriculture began there, that's where you see a lot of these large civilizations rising up. A lot of them had risen and fell, like the Mayans. They're nowhere near as advanced as they used to be because of a variety of different reasons. But Mesoamerica, heart of innovation. It's where you see, again, cities, tens of thousands of people, 20,000 people, even, as we talked about, 200,000 people in Tenochtitlan. We're about to talk about that again. So that's what these Spaniards are seeing. Well, some Spaniards had recently arrived in these islands expecting to come here, conquer the Taínos, you know, claim land, again using the same system they'd used to claim land and enslave people during the Reconquista. But by 15 teens, most of this land in this Caribbean has already been taken. So most of this land has already been handed out to the first conquistadors you see in the Caribbean. Well, some of these new arrivals, they show up and they're looking and they're saying, well, where's mine? You know, I wanted to conquer land. I wanted to have my own slaves. I want to have my own empire. One of the people that has this mindset is a guy named Hernan Cortes. So Cortes is a bastard. He's literally a bastard. So if you ever watch Game of Thrones, just like Jon Snow, doesn't know who his father was, or was born out of wedlock. Cortes and Jon Snow actually know who their father is, spoiler. But Cortes, his father was a noble back in Spain. He had sexual relationship with Cortez's mother, who was not his wife. And then when Cortes was born, Cortez's father refused to recognize Cortes as his son. So Cortes is going to be raised as poor, essentially a rancher with no prospects of upward social and economic mobility. That's the way things worked in Spain. Is basically if you're born poor, you're going to stay poor. Now, maybe if there's a war or during the Reconquista, if you prove yourself in battle, maybe you might make yourself up to the upper class. But by early 1500s, essentially, the classes are cemented. So like the upper class, the elites, make up maybe 5% of people. They have most of the wealth. 95% of the people are like Cortes. And again, they're born poor, they're probably going to die poor. You're born rich in Spain, you're probably going to die rich. Well, Cortes had started to see in the 1490s and very early 1500s that some people had escaped this cycle of poverty by going to the New World and claiming land in the Caribbean. Cortez had gotten some money together. He'd set out to the Caribbean hoping to do the same thing. When he gets out there, however, he finds that, again, all the land had been taken up. Tainos are dying off, but, those who haven't already died off are already enslaved by other Spaniards. So he doesn't have a way to make wealth like some of the first Spanish arrivals in the Caribbean. So what Cortez is going to do is he takes a job as a clerk to the governor of Cuba. So the way the Spanish ruled the Caribbean is when they when people took over these various islands, the Spanish king and queen would send a representative, and basically this representative would make sure that the king and queen get a portion of whatever's coming from these islands. So whether it be in the form of sugar exports, gold that's taken from the Tainos, slaves, the Spanish king and queen want to make sure they have their cut, and the governor is set there to maintain order. So keep things in check for the king and queen of Spain, make sure nobody's revolting or anything like that. So Cortez, he's not upper class, so he can't be a governor, but he is one of the few lower class Spaniards that you would call that knows how to read and write. And so he's going to take a job as a secretary for the governor of Cuba. Not exactly, the upper class job he'd imagined, or taking land that he had imagined. So Cortez, he basically writes letters for the governor of Cuba, dictates laws for the governor of Cuba, just a secretary. That's what he is. So he's in this job, 1518. Cortez, again, still dreaming of making his way to the upper class. Well, he starts to hear rumors of ships coming back, and he's going to hear these rumors eventually coming from Pineda that there's these civilizations out here, people, these ships that are returning from going around the coast out here, around central Mexico, the Yucatan. They're seeing these large cities. Well, Cortez gets in his mind that, all right, the way we conquered this Caribbean is we came in, we told these people they had to convert to Christianity, declare allegiance to Spain. When they refused, we conquered them, and we conquered them in the name of Spain, and then took them over and then made our wealth or something, or the people that came before made their wealth. So he's saying, what if I do that same thing with these large civilizations in the interior? It's actually kind of interesting, something that we didn't talk about much, but the way the Spanish king and queen said you had to do things is they said you can't just go in and take somebody over. You basically have to, offer them to join the Spanish Empire and give allegiance and become Christians. If they accepted, great. If they then rebelled, then you could use violence against them. But none of that really mattered. You didn't have to go through that procedure because the king and queen were all the way over in Spain. But the bottom line is you can conquer. If you have the superior arms, which the Spanish did, you can conquer. And so Cortez hears about these large Indian cities. He wants to conquer them in the name of the king and queen of Spain. So Cortez is going to talk to the governor of Cuba, and he's going to ask for his permission to put together an armed force to investigate these large cities that these ships are arriving back in Cuba, telling everybody about. Well, the governor of Cuba, he's going to talk to Cortez and say, all right, Spanish government is not going to pay for this. You've got to put this together yourself. Cortez will say, sure, I'll get together the men, we'll have our own armor, we'll have our own horses, and he's going to promise the governor of Cuba that whatever they take, the Spanish government will get its cut. Basically, that's the way things worked back then. You didn't have a volunteer army like we do today. It was you join up with somebody, Spain gives their thumbs up, and you promise to serve under the banner of Spain. Everything you conquer, a portion will go back to Spain. You get their blessing, but you put together the army. So the governor will give Cortez permission to put together his army. Not going to pay for it himself, but if Cortez can take care of everything, that's fine. Well, a lot more Spaniards like Cortez had been arriving in Cuba during the 15 teens who want to conquer like the original conquistadors had done with Cuba and Hispaniola. And so Cortez is going to find about 600 of these guys and he's going to say, guys, do you want to come investigate this thing with me? He's going to arrange for some ships to carry the men. He's going to get together horses. Basically, all his recruits, he's going to require them to bring their own horses, firearms, swords, things like that. Well, by late 1518, he's got together 600 guys. And I want you to sort of imagine, didn't exactly happen this way, but it might be better to imagine it this way, that he's loading his 600 guys up onto these ships on a dock in Cuba, and they're getting ready to depart to investigate these cities along the coast of Mexico, when Governor of Cuba comes up to Cortez and says, hey, got some bad news. The king and queen just sent a letter. They don't like the idea of somebody who's not a noble, somebody who's, not somebody that's a close associate of theirs, going to undertake such a big task. They've got this other guy they're going to send instead of you, a guy named Panfilo de Narvaez. And so this rich aristocrat they want instead of you, Hernan Cortes, you lower class guy. So go ahead and offload your ships, and we're going to let Narvaez put together an expedition instead of you. Again, didn't exactly happen face to face. It's in the form of a letter, but Cortez gets this, and essentially he decides, forget the governor of Cuba, forget what the king and queen are talking about. I'm going to take off anyway. If I don't take this opportunity, I'm going to end up, being lower class my entire life. I want what I deserve, and he's going to take his 600 men, and they're going to leave Cuba end of 1518, beginning of 1519, and they're going to start setting off to investigate these large cities. Again, second he leaves, Governor of Cuba learns about it. He's violated a royal order, punishable by, actually could be punishable by death, certainly punishable by prison time. So Cuba is now, Cortez is now a fugitive from the Spanish government, he and his men. Well, they're going to take off. They sail around, let's say, the Yucatan Peninsula. They see the remains of this Mayan civilization. They see some of these large cities, but they keep hearing about this even bigger civilization to the west, this area that's today central Mexico, and they're going to decide to pull up to this area that's today Veracruz. This is main port in Mexico today, and they're going to pull into this area that is where they see this large city. It's basically a Mesoamerican city, and they're going to pull into it, and Cortez is going to offload his ship. What he finds here is, again, a large city that is got plenty of gold, silver, jewelry. Again, these Mesoamerican Indians, very different than the Indians even of Texas, far advanced than any Indians we have in Texas, even more advanced than Mississippi culture or Pueblo culture Indians. And another thing setting the Indians in Veracruz apart from those you see in Texas is the fact is they belong to an empire. So in Mesoamerica in the Andes, the Indians are so advanced, what you started to see is certain cities get bigger than cities next to them, and what they would do is they would start to conquer the cities beside them, and then they would force those cities to pay tribute up to them. And what started to happen is you start to see empires form where one city will have all the cities around it feeding up to it, sending it laborers, sending it tribute in the form of food, and that made the central city even more powerful, which allowed it to extend its reach further. Well, in Mexico, that had been happening around this city of Tenochtitlan. Now, again, there have been empires in Mesoamerica before Tenochtitlan, but beginning about 200 years before Cortez's arrival, you saw this Tenochtitlan start growing big and very big and start conquering its neighbors. And it started this sort of pyramid scheme where its neighbors, it forced them to get tribute from their neighbors, forced them to get tribute from their neighbors. And you have these smaller cities feeding up to larger cities, feeding up to larger cities, ultimately feeding up to Tenochtitlan. And this is going to allow Tenochtitlan's population to grow dramatically. So if you're getting food from other people, if you are getting laborers from other people, your population can continue to grow and grow and grow. Your people don't have to work as much. They can be devoted to military, which means your army gets bigger than your neighbors. And so this allowed the Aztecs, just from the central city of Tenochtitlan, to basically have this area of 10 million people making up, again, central Mexico today, feeding into it. So all these people in this large area in central Mexico, one city given to the next city, then giving up ultimately to Tenochtitlan, these people all came under the Aztecs centered in Tenochtitlan. Now, Tenochtitlan is going to be a large city, again, for all these different reasons. It's centered on a lake. It's actually in the crater of a volcano. Now, this is actually going to be beneficial to Tenochtitlan and allow it to grow to be over 200,000 people. Part of this is because it's defensible. It's hard to attack a city that's surrounded by a lake. But probably a bigger reason is that by being surrounded by a lake, you can get food into the interior of Tenochtitlan much easier than you could if there wasn't water around. One of the interesting things about American Indians, you didn't have wheels used except with toys, so feeding a large population was difficult if you're having to bring food by land. You didn't have the large domesticated animals that can bring food in by land, which other civilizations had. You didn't have wheeled vehicles. So the best way to bring food in was through water. So by being surrounded by a lake, it's easier to transport food into the interior. So again, that allowed the population of Tenochtitlan to grow, which again allowed it to get this big army and again start conquering its neighbors. So you had this huge Indian empire. It was under a king named Montezuma when Cortez arrived in 1519. So essentially, one guy, Montezuma, ruled over 10 million people. Well, Montezuma, here's a mural of Tenochtitlan. The people of, Tenochtitlan, they had cotton clothing, gold, silver jewelry, all this different art right here. Tenochtitlan, it had sewage systems even. Fresh water would come through these aqueducts from neighboring mountains into the city. It would push wastewater out of the city. You would have, again, monumental architecture. They had enough laborers, again, because they're forcing their neighbors to send their own laborers to them, enough to build these huge pyramids. And by the way, Tenochtitlan is today's Mexico City. We're going to talk about why it's called Mexico City, not Tenochtitlan anymore. But these huge cities. One other, actually, final thing with that, Mexico is named Mexico because the valley Tenochtitlan is in is the Mexico Valley. And then later on, that'll be applied to the whole country of Mexico, but we'll get to that. All right, so you had this huge city ruled by these Aztecs, and this huge empire ruled by the Aztecs. One thing we should point out before we go on is that the Aztecs, the people they ruled didn't necessarily like them very much. Now, there were a couple people that voluntarily worked with the Aztecs, but most of the people in the Aztec Empire, they didn't like the fact they're feeding up to these guys. They didn't like the fact that if they disobeyed, the Aztecs would send their army and conquer them. So this isn't an empire like you would think, of as the United States or modern nations, where people voluntarily accept the government. It's you accept the government because if you don't, they're going to kill you. All right, so we got this Tenochtitlan. Well, Montezuma, the ruler of the Aztecs, hears about these weird guys with white faces and facial hair, arriving at the coast, riding these huge animals. Again, horses hadn't existed for 15,000 years in the Americas at this point. They hadn't seen any large animals like this that you could ride. They didn't have ships as big as the Spanish did, or in the same style as the Spanish. They didn't have this shiny steel armor that the Spanish had. And again, white skin, beards, which are not typical with American Indians. So Montezuma hears about these 600 guys that shows up, and he's curious. He's not scared at all because, this is 600 guys. He rules over 10 million people. He's not nervous about them, but he is curious. So he's going to send a bunch of art, a bunch of gold, a bunch of silver to Cortez's forces when he arrives in Tenochtitlan. And he's going to have these, ambassadors, I guess you would say, give these items to Cortez and invite him to visit Montezuma in Tenochtitlan. Well, Cortez is going to see all this gold, silver, and while speaking to the people around Veracruz, he's going to learn. This is a part of this Aztec Empire. He's going to learn about this huge city, Tenochtitlan, in the interior, and he's going to determine, all right, I've got a choice here. Basically, I can go back to Cuba, be arrested, worst case scenario, maybe die for violating the orders of the governor of Cuba and the king and queen, or, best case scenario, live out the rest of my life lower class, or I can use these horses, steel, these other things I have to my advantage to go to the Tenochtitlan, take it over, and make myself ruler of this new area that I've found. Well, Cortez, he's going to discuss this with his men. There's going to be some people hesitant to go forward because they're looking around and saying, wait a minute, we're far outnumbered just in this area we're at right now, and you're talking about going to the heart of this empire, taking it over. No, we think we should go back to Cuba. So what Cortez does is he basically has his men disassemble the ships so nobody else can go back. So we're either going to get rich going to Tenochtitlan, or we're going to die trying to get rich. We're not going to go back and accept fealty to the Spanish. So disassembles the ships, and so these 600 men are going to decide to go to Tenochtitlan. Now, again, Montezuma thinks these guys are going because he's invited them. They're curious about him. He's curious about them. And but again, Cortez has in mind going to Tenochtitlan to conquer. Well, 1519, Cortez is going to start making his way to Tenochtitlan. As he starts passing through the various cities, and again, these are huge cities he's going through. Tens of thousands of people in these cities. Again, this is the heart of American Indian civilization. And he's going to learn that a lot of people don't like the Aztecs. They don't like having to pay up to the Aztecs. A particular group here, these Tlaxcalans, had been trying to resist the Aztecs for a long time. They don't like having to send their kids to work for the Aztecs, to serve in the Aztec military. They don't like to have their food sent to the Aztecs. Passes through there, learns how much discontent there is among the Tlaxcalans, stops at various cities. And these people say, yes, this is not something we like, but again, the Aztecs are so tough, we got to put up with it. So Cortez knows there's discontent in the Aztec Empire. Well, he and his men are going to make their way finally up to Tenochtitlan. Again, they're going to see this large city, 200,000 people, which, by the way, is larger than any city in Europe at the time. There are a handful of cities in China that are larger than 200,000 people. But this is larger than any city in Europe by far. There is the Spanish that are with Cortez. Most of these guys are lower class guys, and most of them, the biggest city they've seen was Sevilla, leaving Spain, which is about 30,000 people. So they're going to be marching up to Tenochtitlan, seeing this huge city, more people than they've ever seen in their entire lives. And Cortez is telling them, we're going to conquer this. Now, these guys are scared. There's stories about them peeing their pants, as they start approaching, going into the interior of Tenochtitlan. And they're going to be walking through, marveling at what they're seeing. Again, the Aztecs don't have steel or gunpowder like the Spaniards do. But there's all these marvels that the Spanish don't have, that they've never seen before. So Cortez and his men walk to the interior of Tenochtitlan, where they're going to approach the largest pyramid where Montezuma has made his home. So Montezuma will be there. He's going to be surrounded by all his priests and this huge entourage he has, his various wives, things like that. And Cortez and his men will approach. Again, Montezuma is going to be very curious about these guys, not scared, because, again, he's got 200,000 people in the immediate area, 10 million people in central Mexico under his rule. But he is curious. Again, look at these unusual-looking people with their unusual-looking clothing, shiny clothing, and these crazy animals they have with them. Montezuma sees Cortez. Cortez is going to approach Montezuma. And what happens next is a matter of debate. So I'll let you guys read alternate sources if you want, but what historians generally think happens is Montezuma goes to embrace this weird stranger, Cortez, that he's heard about. And Cortez is going to approach Montezuma to greet, maybe shake hands, something like that. Well, they go to greet one another, and when they do, Cortez is going to grab Montezuma. He's going to pull him towards him, and he's going to pull out a knife or a sword, hold it to Montezuma's neck, and he's going to say to Montezuma, "Tell your people to do what I say, or you're going to die." So what Cortez has done is he's made a big gamble. He's basically assumed that the Aztecs would listen, believe that their ruler was a god, and that that they would listen to him if he captured their leader. This is going to work. Montezuma is regarded as semi-divine by the Aztecs. They view him as almost like a god on earth. And the idea of him dying, not of natural causes, is unheard of. So when Montezuma then says, "Bring these guys whatever they want," the people are going to listen to him. And so for 6 months, Cortez and his men are going to keep Montezuma hostage. Basically what they do is they keep him in one of these upper rooms on this pyramid, and whenever they need something, they say to Montezuma, "Go out there, tell your people to bring us this." So you can imagine Montezuma walking out on the balcony with a sword sticking into his bag, goes out there and says, "Bring the white men food, bring them women, bring them clothes, bring them whatever they want." So for 6 months, these lower class guys with no prospects on earth have now made themselves wealthy. They're essentially, by keeping Montezuma hostage, they've taken command of a 10 million man empire. And for 6 months, they're just living like, kings, basically. So this is everything that Cortez has wanted. Well, after about 6 months, word is going to arrive in Tenochtitlan that there are other men that look like Cortez, white faces, beards, who have just arrived on the coast. They just arrived in Veracruz. Well, the people that have arrived are a set of 900 Spanish soldiers under a guy named Panfilo de Narvaez. Narvaez is this rich aristocrat, the guy that the Spanish government had sent, initially wanted to take over and investigate central Mexico for Spain. This is the guy that the governor of Cuba told Cortez to, suspend his operation because the king and queen wanted Narvaez to do it instead of him. So Narvaez, when he had arrived in Cuba shortly before, he learned from the governor of Cuba, "Hey, I know the king and queen wanted you to go, but this guy Cortez, he took off without authorization, went to Mexico to conquer the Aztecs instead of you, so he's already there." Well, Narvaez, he assembles 900 guys with dual purposes. One purpose is to take over the Aztecs or whatever civilization he encounters there. The other purpose is to arrest Cortez, bring him back in chains to Cuba, put him on trial for violating orders from the king and queen. So Narvaez arrives in Veracruz. Cortez learns about it. And so Cortez, he's got a decision to make. He's in Tenochtitlan keeping this Montezuma hostage, basically keeping an empire of 10 million people hostage. But now he's got these Spaniards on the coast that are going to come in and try and take what he views as what he's rightfully already taken. So Cortez is going to make a decision. He cannot just leave Tenochtitlan because otherwise the Aztecs, Montezuma will be free, the Aztecs won't let him back in, and he loses control of his empire. So he can't take all 600 of his men, but he can't ignore Narvaez because Narvaez, marched on Tenochtitlan. When he gets there, he might be able to divide the Aztecs, work with the Aztecs to take over Cortez. So what Cortez is going to decide to do is he's going to decide to leave about 350 of his 600 men in Tenochtitlan. He's going to take 250. They've got about 250 horses, so this is convenient. So 250 fast-moving cavalry, and they're going to take off towards Veracruz. So we got 900 men in Veracruz under Narvaez. Cortez is going to head here with 250 men. Well, you can say a lot of things about Cortez, a lot of bad things about him, but one thing that you really can't say is that he was a poor military leader. The guy was a very exquisite military leader, and that's going to become quickly apparent when Cortez and his men arrive in Veracruz to confront Narvaez. So 250 versus 900 seems like you don't have a chance there. Well, Cortez's 250 men are going to attack at night. They're going to surprise Narvaez's forces, and they're going to start beating them. So 250 surprise the 900 men, start winning, but instead of pressing their advantage, Cortez is going to halt his soldiers and then call on Narvaez's men and say to them, hey, guys, we don't want to beat you. We don't want to defeat you. As a matter of fact, we need you. If you guys will join us and defect and leave Narvaez, then you can come join us in Tenochtitlan, and you can have everything your heart's desired. We're back there. We're getting everything that we've ever wanted: gold, silver, women, food, everything that you could ever possibly want is back here in Tenochtitlan. So join me. So the majority of those 900 men are going to say, sorry, Narvaez, this Cortez guy sounds like he's got things going on, and so we're going with him. Narvaez will try to fight with the remainder of his men, but he's going to end up getting captured by Cortez. There's actually two stories of what happens to Narvaez. One story is that he's sitting there fighting on this pyramid at this city right by Veracruz, and one of Cortez's pikemen, jams a pike in his eye and takes out his eye, and then Narvaez is captured. The other story is that Narvaez, seeing that his men are leaving, voluntarily, surrenders. After that point, Cortez then pulls him into his tent and basically says to him, how dare you try to take what's mine. And then Cortez gets a hot poker and sticks it into Narvaez's eye. Don't know which version is true, but Narvaez loses an eye. Now, and then for the coming year and a half, he's going to be a prisoner of Cortez. So Cortez has not only defeated the people that have come to imprison him, but he's also increased the number of men in his army by some 900. Well, what Cortez is then going to do is he's going to take his additional forces. So he's got the 350 back in Tenochtitlan. Now he's got 1,250, and these forces are going to start heading back to Tenochtitlan. Well, word is going to arrive in Tenochtitlan that, man, there are an additional 900 dudes. The other guys, they survived. They're coming back. These other 900 guys are coming with them. Well, you're the Aztecs. You've been having to feed and care for 600 men, get them whatever they want for the past 6 months. Now you're going to have to do this for an additional 900 men. A lot of Aztecs are going to start grumbling about this, and they're going to start, I can't believe this. They're so upset. And then when Cortez and the additional men start arriving in Tenochtitlan, there's a lot of grumbling as they're going through the streets of Tenochtitlan. So people are saying, we need to do something about this. Well, Cortez arrives, and he's going to get Montezuma, and he's going to go tell him, go out on the balcony, tell your people to calm down, tell them to bring whatever these 900 additional men want, tell them to be quiet. We don't know exactly what happens. There's a couple different accounts of what happens, but what we think happens is that Montezuma is going to go out, he's going to get on the balcony, and he's going to make an announcement to his people, bring the Spaniards whatever they want. Well, when he does this, what we think happens is that an Aztec in the crowd looks at Montezuma, basically decides this guy's a puppet, picks up a stone, throws it, hits Montezuma in the head. Montezuma falls off this temple, falls to the ground, hits his head, smashes his head open, dies. And now the Spaniards are sitting here in a city of 200,000 people. Now the whole reason that the 200,000 people have been listening to him, Montezuma, that guy's now dead. And what we're going to see is the Aztecs are just going to start saying, we're not bringing these guys anything anymore, and you're going to start seeing them attack the Spaniards. You see this crazy battle between what we got here. So 1,500 or so Spanish forces and the 200,000 Aztecs. The Spanish are going to have to try to fight their way out of the city. The Aztecs are going to be ripping them off their horses. firing arrows at them. The Spanish are trying to use their cannons to clear paths throughout the street. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as La Noche Triste, or the sad night, because a lot of Aztecs are going to die trying to keep the Spaniards in, and a lot of Spaniards are going to die. As a matter of fact, about half the Spanish forces will die in the flight from the city. So Cortez is going to make it out. Narva is actually his captive, makes it out as well. But these 750,000 people will, 750 people will escape Tenochtitlan, and they're going to start fleeing. And they're actually going to flee in the direction of those Tlaxcalans, that group that particularly hates the Aztecs. And they're going to say, hey, we need protection. You hate the Aztecs more than anybody. Can we, take up residence here, and regather our forces? Well, the Tlaxcalans are going to say, yeah, sure. The way that they see these Spaniards, and this is one of these things, questions you'll sometimes get, why didn't Indians team up together against Europeans? They're not thinking like that. The Tlaxcalans are looking and saying, the Aztecs have been my enemy for, dozens, 100+ years. I've been, either fighting them or having to pay up to them. These guys with their horses and their steel and their guns, they might offer me an opportunity to escape from them. They're not looking to the future and seeing what's going to eventually happen. They're looking at the immediate present and then the past and saying, these guys are a method of escape from Aztec oppression. So they're going to shelter the Spaniards, and the Spanish are going to stay in Tlaxcalia, and they're going to start calling on other Indians from throughout the Aztec Empire, saying, if you're tired of paying up to the Aztecs, send us warriors, send us food. We're going to stop these guys, okay? So if you're just random Indian city in the Aztec Empire, these guys look like they're tough. They look like, hey, this is a solution. This will prevent us from having to pay up to the Spaniards. I don't like sending my kids to serve in the Aztec army. I don't like, having to send half my crops to the Aztecs. These guys are giving me an opportunity to get out from under that. So we're going to see thousands, tens of thousands of Indians start arriving in Tlaxcalia to join the Spanish army. As a matter of fact, there's sources say that there are 99 Indians for every one Spaniard in this army eventually. So Cortez starts putting this huge army together, and he's going to take it and he will surround Tenochtitlan. By this point, it's 1521, so all this has taken place over the course of a year and a half. So by 1521, he's got a big enough force together. He surrounds Tenochtitlan, and what he's going to do is he's going to cut off some of the Aztec bridges to prevent food from getting in overland, and to prevent people from leaving. To prevent canoes from bringing in food, Cortez will order the construction of these boats, which he's going to put Spanish cannons on the boats to allow them to fire on Tenochtitlan, and also to prevent canoes again from bringing in food to the interior. So this is going to be something that is going to start leading the people of Tenochtitlan to start starving because they can't get food into their city. Because again, if the canoe comes by, a Spanish boat will blow it up. If the Spanish would cut off most of the bridges and they're guarding the rest of them. So you see people in here start dying of starvation. They're also going to start dying of disease. One person that arrived with Narvaez is carrying smallpox. Now, it's not intentional, but this person arrived. They showed up in Tenochtitlan, and when they showed up in Tenochtitlan, basically they infected the inhabitant of the city with smallpox. And because the people of Tenochtitlan do not have the immunities the Spanish do, they're going to start dying in droves. Some people estimate that half the population is going to die of smallpox from 1520 to 1521. And you can't leave. And so people are so densely packed, the disease is going to pass from one person to another, which means that by 1521, half the population dying, and then even more are sick. Now again, the Spanish are, they got smallpox as well, but not nearly the percentage die that the Indians do, because they built up immunities over generations from contact with the domesticated animals that the people of the Americas didn't have. So the city starts rotting essentially from the inside. Spanish start firing at the interior with their boats. So people be dying from in that manner as well. And so eventually we will have the city just start rotting. And by August 1521, Cortez is going to determine that I've got enough forces and together enough Indians have rallied to me, and the city is weakened enough that I can end up taking it. And so what he's going to determine is it's time to attack. The Spanish will then move on Tenochtitlan with all of their forces. They're going to start moving across the remaining causeways. So they're going to start attacking this direction, and the Aztecs will start fighting them. There's this huge battle that will take place. The Spanish are using their cannons, their crossbows, their guns. The Aztecs actually came up with countermeasures to their horses. They build these pit traps where the horses fall in and die. The Aztecs are going to take to their canoes, try to fire the Spanish on the causeways as they're crossing. You see a kind of depiction of that here. This is actually a drawing by the Aztecs themselves. They're in their canoes firing on the Spanish. You see this depiction. It's got the Spaniards fighting here. This guy's probably an Indian ally of the Spanish. This guy right here is a jaguar warrior. This is an Aztec warrior. This is like their special forces. This is an obsidian club they had. They didn't have steel weapons, but they had these wooden weapons that they would attach with obsidian, which is not metal. It's a stone, very sharp stone. And they're going to fight, and then you see up here there's this Spanish boat with its cannons. It's going to be firing at the causeways. And so this huge battle takes place, and this is a really good depiction of it right here. Again, you'll see the boats and the Aztecs. Well, throughout August, the Spanish are going to be pushing in with their Indian allies. Eventually, by the end of August, the Spanish will take the interior of Tenochtitlan. They're going to capture the remaining Aztec leaders, and they're going to tell them, listen, you have a choice. You can either continue to resist, or you can accept our rule, accept the rule by Cortez. The Aztecs are going to accept Cortez's rule, and what we're going to see now is Cortez is basically going to take the position of Montezuma at the top of the Aztec pyramid. He's going to become ruler of this Aztec Empire. So what happens at this point is kind of interesting. Cortez hypothetically could have become his own emperor, but the Spanish king and queen hear about what's happened, and they're going to send emissaries and say to Cortez, listen, if you stay with Spain, we'll recognize your rule, we'll make you governor of Mexico, we'll call it New Spain from this point forward, and you can do whatever you want, just have to pay a percentage of what you collect there to the Spanish king and queen. Cortez doesn't want to have to worry about the Spanish, occasionally invading or anything like that. He's going to accept this, and essentially this is going to make Cortez the second most powerful person in the Spanish Empire. So king of Spain, then Cortez, which essentially makes him one of the most powerful people in the world. Maybe the Emperor of China could say something, and obviously the King of Spain could say something. But besides those two people, really, Cortez is the most powerful person in the world. And what we're going to see Cortez do is he's going to start dividing up Aztec territory, giving it to his loyal Spaniards. So you get this land over here. He's going to take Aztecs who resisted him under that encomienda. He's going to start giving them out to those who had served under him, and so he's going to start rewarding those who had helped him. Now, as far as those Indians who had assisted Cortez, initially Cortez is going to say, "All right, well, now you're free of the Aztecs, but you know what? Why don't you keep giving us tribute? Why don't you keep paying up to us? But instead of paying to Montezuma, why don't you pay up to me?" So the thing is, the Indians who had joined Cortez, they thought they were going to get rid of the Aztecs. And they did, but essentially they replaced the Aztecs with the Spanish. And what we're going to see Cortez start doing from this point forward, now that he, and ultimately King of Spain, is on top of the empire, is they're going to start deconstructing First, it starts with Tenochtitlan. Then it's going to start with those exterior cities, even those that ended up insisting the Spanish in defeating the Aztecs and forcing them to become more European-like. Like, for example, this is a city kind of near Tenochtitlan, which the Spanish renamed Mexico City and make the capital of New Spain. But if you look at this, they basically built a church on top of a pyramid, and over time the pyramid got overgrown, and all people knew was the church. But archaeologists have recently started digging up the hill, what people thought was just a hill, and realizing, well, no, this used to be a pyramid. The Spanish just built things on top of it, and that's what's going to happen to Tenochtitlan. Is the Spanish will start building churches, disassembling these pyramids, and building European-style buildings. So if you go to Mexico City today, you go down in the sewers or whatever, those are probably former Aztec streets. If you go to a church in Mexico City, it's probably built on top of an Aztec pyramid. It's basically built on top of Tenochtitlan. So we see the Spanish start remaking Mexico under Cortez, and the whole thing of this, the whole deal we talked about Cortez, and the whole reason that we've talked about this extensively in a class about Texas, is the fact that this is going to get other Spaniards thinking. All right, so you have all these lower class Spaniards who are dreaming of making their way to the top. Now they look at Cortez, a bastard lower class Spaniard who now is at the top, one of the most powerful people in the world. And what we're going to see after Cortez is that every Spaniard who can is going to start setting out in search of their own Tenochtitlan. Spaniards start thinking, all I've got to do is do what Cortez did, put together a small army, I'll find another Tenochtitlan, I'll take it over, and then I'm going to become my own conqueror. And what we're about to talk about is these conquistadors setting out. They're going to set out through South America, set out through Central America, but some are going to set their way out towards North America. And a lot of these ones that go north are going to start going through Texas.